Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946. To the outside world, he seemed clean-cut and affable, a polite face and confident manner that hid a predatory violence. By the mid-1970s, that persona let him move through college campuses, suburban shopping centers, and poorly coordinated police jurisdictions without immediate suspicion. Beginning in 1974, an alarming wave of disappearances hit the Pacific Northwest. College students and young women vanished from Seattle, Tacoma, and rural recreation areas. Notable cases include University of Washington student Linda Ann Healy, who disappeared on January 31, 1974, and the abductions of Janice Ott and Denise Naslund from Lake Sammamish State Park in July 1974, episodes that left families baffled and detectives struggling to find links. Bundy did not stay confined to Washington. He prowled across Utah and Colorado and ultimately struck in Florida, creating a multi-state horror from 1974 through 1978 that outpaced the era's fragmented investigative tools. He exploited routine kindnesses, often feigning injury or authority to gain trust, then used calculated violence and cold improvisation to silence women who were students, teachers, neighbors, people with names, faces, and futures. The pattern stayed hidden because local police forces worked from paper files, lacked centralized communication, and treated cases as isolated missing person reports. Forensic science had not yet matured. DNA analysis was decades away, and jurisdictions were slow to share sketches, eyewitness reports, and vehicle descriptions. The human toll was concrete. Mothers, fathers, classmates, and partners were left with unanswered phone calls and empty beds, their grief amplified by procedural confusion and public fear. In 1970s America, increasing mobility and limited interagency coordination turned Bundy's charm and freedom of movement into tactical advantages, allowing a string of daylight and shadowed abductions across Washington, Colorado, Utah, and Florida before patterns finally coalesced and law enforcement began to assemble the grim puzzle. Detectives in Seattle, Tacoma, and King County began to notice the same jagged signature across separate missing person files. Young women with long hair parted in the middle, college students and young professionals taken in daylight, last seen talking to a clean-cut man who pretended to be injured or who claimed some kind of authority, and eyewitnesses describing an older Volkswagen Beetle. Those common threads pulled isolated reports together from January 31, 1974, when University of Washington student Linda Ann Healy vanished from her Seattle apartment, through the July 14, 1974 abductions of Janice Ott and Denise Naslund at Lake Sammamish State Park, into a pattern that could no longer be contained by county lines. By late 1974, the King County Sheriff's Office was quietly comparing sketches and timelines with investigators in neighboring jurisdictions. And in early 1975, federal agents began cataloging similarities that suggested a roaming predator rather than random kidnappers. The first concrete lead that really changed everything was not a confession, but survival. On November 8, 1974, in Murray, Utah, Carol Daronk fought back and escaped an abductor who had pretended to be a plainclothes police officer, then later gave a detailed description of her attacker and of the license plate and features of the car. Daronk recalled a chipped tooth, a deliberate, practiced charm, and a Volkswagen. And those details linked a violent attempt in Utah to the disappearances in Washington and a growing list of cold files in Colorado. That connection forced a brutal reframing. The smiling, articulate man who could pass as a boyfriend or a responsible volunteer was now the center of a regional investigation. Newspapers and campus rumor mills that had once treated the missing as isolated tragedies began printing composite sketches and car descriptions. Police bulletins circulated photographs and interviews. Subscribe. Maybe it will help us solve the case. The contrast between Theodore Robert Bundy, a law student who volunteered at crisis centers and dated Elizabeth Klopfer, and the mounting forensic and eyewitness evidence created a jarring dissonance that hardened into suspicion. The next major development came when Daronk identified Bundy in a lineup, and Utah detectives arrested a man who fit the description in August 1975. The arrest did not end the mystery. It widened it as investigators scrambled to determine which unsolved disappearances and later recovered remains across Washington, Utah, and Colorado could be attributed to a single, methodical predator. The investigation hardened into a national manhunt as Theodore Robert Bundy escalated from a regional predator into a brazen fugitive, exploiting jurisdictional gaps and sloppy custodial routines. After Carol Duranch escaped and identified him on November 8, 1974, prosecutors began piecing together charges across Utah and Colorado, but Bundy used court appearances and bail privileges to maneuver. On June 7, 1977, he leapt from a second-story window of the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen and vanished into the Rocky Mountain night. The jump was a humiliating physical breach that stunned local authorities and sent detectives combing motels and mountain roads until he was recaptured days later. That first escape sharpened public fear. Newspapers printed his photograph under alarming headlines, and investigators tightened protocols, yet security remained porous. On December 30, 1977, Bundy carried out a more calculated breakout from the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, cutting through an interior ceiling and slipping past an under-resourced booking area. He vanished into the interstate system and crossed state lines with the cold efficiency that had marked his earlier abductions. Within weeks, he was in Florida. On January 15, 1978, a savage escalation occurred at the Chi Omega sorority house on the campus of Florida State University in Tallahassee. A brutal, frenzied attack left two students, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, dead and others wounded, shattering a college community and turning a regional manhunt into a national emergency. The Chi Omega murders, violent, intimate, and indiscriminately vicious, forced federal involvement and relentless media scrutiny. The story of a clean-cut volunteer turned monstrous killer became headline fodder from Seattle to Tallahassee. Bundy in Florida linked earlier disappearances to a living threat who had learned how to exploit travel, anonymity, and institutional blind spots. On February 9, 1978, 9-year-old Kimberly Leach was abducted in Lake City, Florida, an act that deepened public outrage and underscored the widening brutality of his crimes. By February 15, 1978, local police in Pensacola arrested a man driving a stolen vehicle following a routine traffic stop. The man was Bundy. The arrest sent a wave of relief and horror through the country, but it did not resolve the enormity of what had been done. The escapes had exposed investigative weaknesses and multiplied victims. The Chi Omega slayings crystallized public terror and galvanized interagency cooperation, forensic effort in an era before DNA testing, and obsessive prosecutorial focus. Investigators, now working across state lines and bolstered by federal resources, prepared to assemble the paperwork, witness testimony, and gruesome physical evidence that would be needed to end Bundy's roaming violence and bring the story to trial. After the Pensacola traffic stop on February 15, 1978, the case shifted from a frantic manhunt to the methodical gathering of evidence. Bundy's arrest in Pensacola didn't just end his flight. It gave investigators a suspect they could compare against the long string of disappearances from Seattle to Lake City. In the weeks that followed, witnesses who had once offered only fragmentary descriptions began to provide specifics. Survivors like Carol Duranch described the chipped tooth, the practiced smile, and the ruse of posing as a plainclothes officer. Neighbors and students in Tallahassee placed a clean-cut man near the Chi Omega sorority on January 15, 1978. Motorists and gas station attendants remembered a Volkswagen and unusual travel patterns. Forensic teams turned ordinary objects into prosecutable links. Hairs and fibers taken from Bundy's vehicles and apartments were compared microscopically to hairs recovered with victims, and distinctive personal items tied him to scenes in Washington and Florida. Most consequential were the bite mark analyses. Odontologists mapped torn flesh and patterned impressions on the bodies of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, and matched those impressions to dental casts of Bundy's teeth. That testimony would become central at trial. Investigators in Florida coordinated with detectives in Washington, Utah, and Colorado. exchanging case files, timelines, and autopsy reports to build a multi-state portrait of a single predator. That consolidation was as much a prosecutorial decision as an investigative one. Florida prosecutors chose to pursue capital murder charges for the Chi Omega killings and for the abduction and murder of Kimberly Leach because those cases offered the strongest immediate forensic ties and the statutory route to the death penalty. Bundy and his defense responded with theatrical legal strategies that blurred courtroom decorum and media spectacle. Bundy used charm and interruption to humanize himself before jurors, tested procedural boundaries by trying to address witnesses directly, and later insisted on representing himself at hearings to control his narrative. Prosecutors countered by stacking testimonial, physical, and circumstantial evidence into coherent timelines that mapped his movements from Seattle in 1974 to Tallahassee in 1978, and by turning surviving testimony, Duranche's identification, campus eyewitness accounts, and Chi Omega house staff observations into corroborated fact. As pre-trial motions and evidentiary hearings mounted, the linked evidence hardened suspicion into a prosecutable file. Bite mark charts, hair comparisons, eyewitness IDs, travel logs, and consolidated missing person reports converged to make a single claim increasingly inescapable. Bundy was not an accidental suspect, but the architect of a gruesome interstate murder spree, and the case was ready for trial. The Florida trials became an arena where investigative accumulation turned into courtroom reckoning. In 1979 in Tallahassee, jurors heard grisly dental comparisons, microscopic hair and fiber matches, eyewitness identifications, and survivor testimony that traced a single predatory path from Seattle to Florida. Bite mark evidence from Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy was presented with clinical exactness. Forensic odontologists displayed patterned impressions and compared them to dental casts linked to Theodore Robert Bundy. Carol Duranche and other witnesses described the chipped tooth and practiced charm that had lured and terrorized victims. Families of the slain, the parents and siblings of Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, and later Kimberly Leach, gave restrained, anguished statements about stolen futures and ragged grief, forcing the courtroom to hold forensic proof and human devastation side by side. Juries found him guilty and sentenced him to death, translating horror into legal finality and taking away Bundy's ability to roam. In the years after conviction, Bundy offered partial, often self-serving confessions to investigators, admitting to killing at least 30 women and providing locations and details that helped resolve some cold cases. His admissions were fragmentary and sometimes contradictory, never comprehensive. But they supplied nervous closure for detectives and families seeking graves and names. Appeals and stays delayed finality, but the legal process culminated in capital punishment. On January 24, 1989, at Florida State Prison in Stark, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in the electric chair. When the switch ended his life, the judicial chapter closed, but survivors and investigators were left to reckon with the lingering, obscene geography of his crimes. After his convictions and final execution on January 24, 1989 at Florida State Prison in Stark, the shocking scope of Theodore Robert Bundy's violence forced concrete changes in law enforcement, forensics, college campuses, and public awareness. Police agencies moved from isolated paper files to coordinated task forces and national databases. The FBI expanded the behavioral science unit's offender profiling work and developed systems like the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, in 1985 to help link mobile predators across state lines. Forensic practice shifted as well. Microscopic hair comparison and bite mark testimony that helped convict Bundy were later scrutinized and, in many cases, discredited. By the 1990s, DNA testing became routine, transforming evidence standards and exposing the limits of earlier methods. College campuses, from Florida State to schools nationwide, tightened security, locked entry policies, emergency phones, escort services, and stricter visitor checks at sorority houses became common. The case also fed a ferocious public and media appetite. Anne Rule's The Stranger Beside Me, 1980, and countless true crime retellings cemented Bundy in cultural memory, sometimes at the expense of victims' dignity. Beyond institutional reforms are the survivors and families. People like Carol Durant and the families of Linda Healy, Janice Ott, Denise Naslund, Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, and Kimberly Leach remain central, demanding accountability and truth. Bundy's story continues to force painful questions about media spectacle, the death penalty, forensic reliability, and how justice balances public safety with victims' rights and long-term healing.